Well, hi, I'm Kevin Scully, sitting in today for Carl Seidel on The People's View, and I have a very interesting guest that I would like to introduce everybody to, and that is John Cawthron. John, thank you so much for coming and being with us.
Kevin, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So the first time I saw you was, I think it was in December. I went to what is the Nashua City Republican City Committee meeting, and that committee had fallen on hard times.
Yes.
And we were just moments away from having the committee taken over by state receivership when you and John Lewis jumped up and said, hey, we want to take this job on ourselves. We're going to turn this committee around. And I tell you, for me, that was a pretty dramatic moment, and I'm very glad you did. So we will get to that.
Okay.
We're going to roll back to that, but that's why when you did that, I said, okay, this is a person I need to talk to.
Okay.
But what I was hoping was we could just start with you in terms of your background, where you're from. Were you born here? Did you come here? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I grew up in Billerica, Massachusetts in the 70s and 80s. The best time really to be in America now as I look back, because basically back then as a kid you do whatever you wanted. I grew up on the river that would freeze every winter, so we'd be shoveling off the ice and playing hockey all the time and going sledding, and it's a great time to be alive, and that's when Massachusetts was the cradle of liberty. Yep. And at that time, I read every book in my elementary school library in history. My heroes are the people in the American Revolution, particularly some people from Billerica fought at Bunker Hill. Asa Pollard died in that battle. He was from Billerica. And, Lexington and Concord, those battles were very close to where I grew up to. And I think, what's that road in Concord that the Patriots marched down on Patriots Day? So those battles took place near my house. And I loved Massachusetts when I grew up. I actually used to deliver the Lowell Sun, and I was able to read the Lowell Sun as I delivered it all the time. And I was a voracious reader as a young man. And that was a time when the Democrats and Republicans in Massachusetts got together. That's when Edmund Brooks was a congressman. That's when Father Drinan was actually a congressman. Mm-hmm. That's when Paul Tsongas was a congressman. So I knew a lot about politics. I saw Senator Daniel Moynihan from New York, very smart, intelligent guy. Got along with Jack Kemp from New York as well. So I kind of knew about history and politics as a young person, although I was never involved, but I have made it a point to always vote in every single election. Since I turned 18, I voted in every election that wherever I've lived. So Massachusetts drastically changed as I got older, and instead of being a cradle of liberty, it's got more restrictive and more liberal. But I still enjoy living there. But then in 2004, my wife and I, we couldn't afford to buy a house there. Mm-hmm. So we decided to move to Nashua because we found a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood right over the line. And I immediately got a 6% raise when I moved here as well because my company was in New Hampshire. So in Massachusetts, I had always been somewhat of an independent person. I was not enrolled in any party, but the independent, if as an independent, you could be part of a party in Massachusetts called the Independent Party. So I didn't really get involved in politics at all. In New Hampshire, I just made sure I voted. I did support candidates and so forth, but in several presidential elections, I voted for the third party candidate. Mm-hmm. I voted for Ralph Nader. I voted for Jill Stein because the two candidates that were there, neither one of them was very palatable, so I voted for someone else. So I wasn't in politics as a person like running for office until COVID hit. And that was my impetus for getting into politics, because being a student of history, knowing the American story, knowing what the American Revolution people went through to get the freedoms we have, to actually win that war and beat the strongest military on earth. Remember, the British Empire, the sun's never set on it. Right. So for a group of farmers to get together and rally people in the churches to form a militia and to beat the most powerful military, it's an incredible thing. Yes, and the individual stories of sacrifice of the people now, like Israel Putnam, who died at Bunker Hill, he was the doctor that led the colonial forces there. Oh, yes. So, Ian, remember, the colonial soldiers they had muskets, they didn't have bayonets, and they were terribly afraid of the British bayonet charge, which you get bayoneted to death. So it filled me with the patriotic spirit, I would say, that maybe be proud, and they were my heroes, those type of people. Right. So when COVID hit, I'm like, we live in America. A governor or a mayor or some alderman just can't take my rights away. There's a constitution. That can't be ignored. There's no escape clause for the Bill of Rights that can't be suspended. The founding fathers certainly knew about plagues and pandemics and so forth, and they didn't put you have the right of freedom of speech and right of assembly except or unless or until. And the king gave out edicts that we rebelled against King George III to have freedom. So when I saw all that happening, I'm like, this can't be happening, because yes, everyone should be able to stay home if they want to, but the government shouldn't say, you got to stay home. And we're going to, more than that, we're going to shut down your job. We're going to shut down businesses. We are going to close Alcoholics Anonymous, but keep the liquor stores open. It made no sense to me. So I delved into, like, is this thing real? What is this respiratory virus? And I, again, being a voracious reader, I looked at all the experts on virology and epidemics and what do you actually do? And the whole world was going crazy and doing the opposite of what should be done. So in 2022, I'm like, I need to get into the State House and be part of Reopen New Hampshire, Rebuild New Hampshire, and part of the medical freedom movement that, you know, the pandemics are a serious issue.
Right.
But you don't shut down society to get rid of them. In other words, even right now, I might be going off topic, supposedly the bird flu is going through all the birds of the world, and that's a real big thing. So they're culling the crop. They've killed 150 million birds to supposedly get around this flu. That can't work, because the wild birds are what carry the flu.
Right. Those are the
and if that made sense, then push that forward. Would you kill 50 million people to get rid of the human flu? No, it makes no sense. It wouldn't work. You can't do that.
Right.
So the idiocy of the times, and I know that's a harsh word, but that's how I saw it, because the experts are being ignored. So I'm like, I need to get into politics, to have a voice in politics, to keep our freedoms alive, to keep what I learned growing up, and to stand up to the powers that be that were taking our freedoms away.
Well, it's interesting, because I do think a lot of conservatives, I always make the joke, I get into politics as an act of self-defense. Because most conservatives, I believe, they feel like they're capable of running their lives, they want to run their lives, they're going to take care of themselves and their families, they're going to go out and they're going to, you know, make their way in the world. And what they really want is basically just that things are fair and that people get out of their way. And from my perspective, what it seemed like that the government was becoming more and more intrusive into our lives. And, you know, what do you do about that? Well, I think it was the same decision you made, which is to say, well, the only way that you can actually make sure that somebody doesn't take away your rights is to be the person up, you know, in the position of power to make sure that the power is used and not abused. And so, and I think that's another problem I see with government, is there are certain types of people. There are some people who firmly believe they have the answers to all of the problems, and they seek out that power because they want to use it. And they're going to change society and try to mold it into what they think is going to be their utopia. But sometimes that hurts a lot of innocent people, and they're not always right. And then you have conservatives who really aren't seeking that power, and so they're not really attracted to government, and therefore usually they're in the minority in government. So New Hampshire is a wonderful exception from where I sit. We've got a lot of citizen activists, and we do have a pretty good balance of conservatives who are up there too, to try to make sure that government does not become too overbearing and run people's lives. So I think, I think we, came probably to the same place for pretty much the same reasons. I was just lucky enough to win, and given the demography of my ward, I'm not sure why, but I did go out and I knocked on a lot of doors and I talked to a lot of people, and I was successful in that. And it's Nashua is a kind of a tough place if you're a conservative and a Republican, as I know you know.
Yeah, it is, because out of 50,000 registered voters, there's 17,000 registered Democrats, 12,000 registered Republicans, but luckily there are 21,000 registered independents or undeclareds. So going back to, I ran for state rep in 2022 to get into the State House to try to put limits on the overreach of power, because we can't be ruled by edicts. We can't be ruled by mandates. We're supposed to be ruled by the rule of law. The Constitution is the law of the land, the U.S. Constitution being number one, the New Hampshire Constitution is subservient to that. But when you see public officials just running roughshod over the law, over the Constitution, it's like, that's not okay. And with limited resources, as most citizens have, I couldn't take someone to court. I don't know how. I couldn't be a pro se litigant because I wouldn't know what I was doing. So I'm like, well, if I can get in the legislature and join other people of like mind to just put limits on the government officials who overstep their bounds. And even if they did overstep their bounds in trying to make things safe, individual liberty is more important. I should be able to choose what's safe for me. Just like going on the ice. in certain places in Massachusetts, you can't go on the ice in towns. When I was little, we'd just go chop a hole in the ice and see if it's thick enough, you know, and use our common sense. And, you know, no one ever fell in and died because no one wanted to. So you have to allow freedom at first, you know, and everyone has the freedom to stay home if they wish. Everyone has the freedom to wear a mask if they wish. But people's opinions should not be forced on everyone else, particularly when they'll say it's the science. No, science never stops discovering. The science is not settled. And what we knew up to that point, we already knew masks didn't work. We knew that keeping everybody home didn't work. What works is herd immunity. So I ran in 2022, and for the first time out, I did pretty well. And I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I'm just like, all right, I'm going to run for state rep. How do I do this? Eye-opening experience, and I got involved with the Nashua Republican City Committee at that point because there's a person in Nashua who's a hero in my eyes. Her name is Di Lothrop. She was part of the Nashua Republican City Committee, and she was running our fundraiser called the Stakeout. And I want to say it's 2022, maybe 2021, I forget. Matt Gaetz was coming to be the speaker, and Governor Sununu, who I respect, I think he's a good guy, was against Matt Gaetz coming here. And Di stood up and said, oh no, we'll have Matt Gaetz here because it's a free country and this is who we want and we're going to do what's right. Matt Gaetz will be our speaker. And I'm like, that's a person I want to be involved with. A brave person who stood up to authority and said, no, Matt Gaetz, this is a free country. He can come here and be part of our stakeout. So that's what caused me to join the NRCC, which I did. And I got a few other people to join. And I've been going to the meetings since then. And in 2023, they try to get more Republicans elected in Nashua, so they asked a bunch of us to run for moderator. And I'm like, moderator, what's that? Doesn't sound very important. It's the guy with the tie at the front door when you vote. Sounds like a glorified wedding usher or something. But I threw my hat in the ring to help out the Republican Party in Nashua, and I won. So once I won that, I'm like, wow, I'm the moderator. What does that do? So that was another whole learning experience in and of itself. And I've run 3 elections now. And during that time, I've battled with the Secretary of State and the Attorney General and the city of Nashua because I follow the New Hampshire Constitution. Most people don't. And they don't know that how powerful the moderator position is. It's in Part 2, Article 32, that says the moderator governs the elections, receives, counts, and sorts the votes in presence of the selectman and town clerk. So when elections go, as far as elections go, it's been pushed aside, but the moderator is the big cheese. I don't answer to the Secretary of State, although now we're in a situation where people think that we do. And I love Dan Healy. He's a great city clerk. Nashua's lucky to have him, but he's not my boss either. I answer to the Constitution. I represent the voters. So being like one of the lone moderators do this, it gets to be a lonely place, but I know what I'm doing is right. So, and then in 2020, sorry if I'm such a long talker.
No. Listen, I brought you on here because I wanted to give you the platform so you could tell people who we are and what you're all about. So please continue.
Thank you. So, I have a great election staff as far as Ward 9 goes because I'm in Ward 9 and run that. And the presidential election, the last one was a huge long day. We had almost 6,000 voters. And I found out what the moderator does and I put together a ward team to make sure everything ran smoothly, and it did. It's a 20-hour day, which I didn't know. You start at 5 in the morning, you end when it ends because we have to, everything's pretty much analog in New Hampshire with the exception of the tabulator. Tabulator is electronic, but it is not connected to the internet. It's basically a standalone machine that, counts up the votes and prints out a tape and so forth. And then we recount the votes, count all the ballots, and then we submit the results to the Secretary of State. But it is a hugely long day. And the efforts of the volunteers in the election system of New Hampshire is unbelievable. And I think most people don't know the work that goes into it to make sure everything's done right, and it mostly is.
So you have same-day registrations. Do you remember roughly how many folks came in or registered on the same day of the election?
Over 500.
Okay. Do you have any sense of how many of those might have been college students?
I don't, because as I would say there's a lot of young men registering the same day, but as the moderator, I run around the whole school, making sure everything's running right. So I'm basically the conductor of the circus in the big tent, making sure everything's going right, answering people's complaints, handling things that come up, such as we had people calling because their absentee ballot got voided because they didn't sign the outside. So they would show up and say, can I come in and vote? And addressing situations like that. Then there were several things.
Would you let them vote?
It's not up to me. Basically, there's a process in place that if we know their absentee ballot was voided because we have a list of them, the city clerk provides us with that. If they show up with their ID and they want to vote, then yes, we can give them a ballot.
Because they haven't double voted.
Yeah, and we have their absentee ballot here that has not been opened, or in some cases they're disabled, so we will go out and meet them at the curb with the ballot, because a lot of people vote by absentee because they're disabled, or they can't leave their house for health reasons. So when they found out their ballot was voided, they'll be driven to the polling location, and we will actually have the city clerk, my ward clerk, will send someone out with a ballot so they can fill it out.
Oh, wow.
So there are provisions for that. So as far as the same-day registrations go, I'm pretty sure that's not just New Hampshire. I think that's part of a federal law. So there's the HAVA Act and there's the Motor Voter Act.
Yeah, I was wondering, I thought you could either have it done at the Registry of Motor Vehicles or...
Not in New Hampshire, as far as I'm aware. So the Motor Voter Act it's a federal law that allowed states to put in place that when you get your driver's license, you can automatically be registered to vote, which I don't think is a good idea, because you also have to, the federal law requires you to be a U.S. citizen to vote.
Right, but there's also people who are registering to vote who don't have a New Hampshire driver's license.
That does happen, and there's processes in place for that too, but that's also part of HAVA. That's the Help America Vote Act, put that in place, that there has to be a way to allow people to vote if they don't have identification. But it's called an affidavit ballot. They have to come back afterwards and show their identification, and then the ballot's supposed to be removed. So it's a very cumbersome process.
Right.
We should really get to show your ID in order to vote.
How about the issue of absentee voters? And I mean, there are people who would register to vote, and they, again, if it was a college student, they might move out of state, but they're still on the rolls. Is that right? So how do you clean those up? Is it done once every 10 years, or? Well,
I think there's a federal law that has to be cleaned up once every 10 years, but then Dan Healy and City Hall are the ones who actually maintain the Nashua voter rolls. I think they interact with the city of state. So most towns have what's called the supervisor of the checklists, and they're supposed to check their lists every 3 months, and the Secretary of State provides them with updated data based on the United Post Office, Post Service. It's basically when someone moves and they submit an address change to the post office, that information gets sent to the Secretary of State, and I forget the acronym for it, but the Secretary of State is supposed to update that list, I believe, every 3 months, because I know a few supervisors of the checklists, and they're supposed to be removing people. Does it always happen as it's supposed to? No. I know in Nashua, Dan Healy and the board of, there's a small board that Dan presides over that meets, I think, quarterly. And they're supposed to be the ones to update the voter list by removing voters who are no longer on the list. It doesn't always probably happen in such a timely manner that people are interested in voting integrity like I want it to happen. But I did note, since when I ran for office in 2022, I had the voter list for my ward. When I ran again in 2024, I had the voter list of my ward, and a lot of the names were gone.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm actually happy to hear that they're doing that. They're not waiting 10 years to update those lists.
Yeah, I think that's a federal requirement. And I'm not exactly sure what the state requirement, but that's the Secretary of State's purview. And then Dan Healy in Nashua, I would say, does a very good job at updating the voter list. But it's at their schedule. They have a process in mind, because I was part of a group called True the Vote, and we found a bunch of people on the Nashua voter rolls, or at least in the database, that we had moved. I think it was 6,000 of them. Wow. So I got involved with notifying Dan Healy about the ones in my ward, and turns out that all the databases hadn't been compared and honed down, let's say. But then the process of removing some of the voters that I knew didn't live here anymore happened. But I think Dan in that Board of Supervisors meets quarterly, like I said. And then there's also, as you get close to an election, there's another federal law that prevents mass purges of the voter list within 90 days of an election.
Oh, interesting.
So the voting laws get really intertwined and interconnected, and it's hard to sort out to even know you're doing the right thing.
So if somebody was accidentally taken from the roll, again, they still would have the ability to register that same day if they came in and they had ID and they showed. So we're not necessarily robbing anybody of the right to vote. It's just...
I would say New Hampshire bends over backwards to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to vote.
Right.
But I think we also can all agree that you should have an ID to vote.
I agree.
And that your domicile should be here, not that you go to college here and you can cross, just be in Keene or Hanover or Badbury, where UNH is, and you really live in New Jersey, but you're voting here. That definitely swings elections to...
Yeah, we seem to be close enough in terms of the proportion of the voters. I believe like Hillary Clinton had beaten Donald Trump by 2,500 votes statewide, and I think we had about 6,000 college students registering that same day, and I would assume the majority of them were voting for Hillary. So it really can make a big difference.
It can, and you're not supposed to be able to vote from a commercial address or a vacant lot. So when I was working with True the Vote, I saw people who were voting from hotel rooms. So they're using hotels as their address.
Wow.
So is this all illegitimate? I don't know, but some of it is, and it needs to be looked into.
All right, so I do want to come back to the city committee because
Yes.
they said, I thought that was, and thank you for that explanation, by the way. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. I did. But as I said, I thought it was a pretty dramatic moment when they were just about to take the vote to put the city committee into receivership, and you and Avalon jumped up and said, hey, we're going to take this up and we'll take over and we're going to try to save this committee. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
So what was, it sounded like you're a very busy man. What made you decide to take on even more work?
Well, I have to go back to the election. In 2024, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General mandated two things which I was not going to do. One was that anyone who wanted their ballot hand counted, that we would take their information and report them to the Attorney General. So I said, I'm not doing that. So my ward clerk, Emily DeSazic, was going to take the information from two people, and I said, we're not doing that. And I told all my ward workers that we are not going to take the information of voters. This is not Germany. We're not saying, give me your papers, please, to vote. Right. So the people she was talking to, I said, Madam, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, whatever your name is, I don't even want to know what it is, put your ballots in the hand slot. They'll be hand counted. Please go on your way. We're not going to, at least in Nashua, Wards 9, we're not going to report people for wanting to vote. So I got... I called the Attorney General's office on that issue, I believe, along with another couple other issues. And then back to the Constitution. The Constitution mandates that I receive, sort, count, and votes and announce the results. So I had set up a parallel hand count for the governor's race. I used my selectman, Andrew Higgins, and I made a pro tem from Young John, who's part of the committee, to actually, we count the ballots at the end of every election anyways. We pull them out of the tabulator, we put them in piles and count them. So, they were going to pull out all the ballots and count them, but just put an Ayotte pile and a Craig pile and then count them up and add them up to make sure the ballots, the one number we started with was the number we ended with, then compare that to the tape, the tabulator tape. Well, my ward clerk called the Attorney General and reported me for doing an audit. And I wasn't doing an audit because we hadn't certified the election yet.
Right.
So I got on the phone with the Attorney General, Dick Tracy from the Attorney General's office. Now remember, I was on the ballot, so technically two RSAs that are unconstitutional, but they're still in force, prevent me from touching any ballots or participating in the counts at all. So I was behind the rail. The rail is like, if you're behind the rail, you're part of the the election workers. If you're on the other side of it, which is an unrestricted area where I was, you're not part of that process. So at the end of the election on November 5th, 2024, I was arguing with the Attorney General, Dick Tracy, in the office 15 minutes over my right to have that parallel hand count done. It was a long day. I was tired. Andrew and Young didn't know what they were getting into when I asked them to do this. They're like, this is a great idea. It's a check and balance in the voting system. The tabulators might be programmed wrong. Who knows? So because I couldn't take part in the process and I didn't want to get them the grief from the Attorney General that I was getting, I told them, just count the ballots regularly and we'll address this parallel hand count at a future election, because it is a good quality control check to make sure that count up the ballots. Do they match what the tape says? I forgot that Bill O'Brien, who was the Speaker of the House and he's a parliamentarian for the GOP, told me that if I run into any problems, to call him. And I forgot. So I didn't remember to call him because he probably would have stood up for us for the Attorney General's office. He also intervened on my behalf when the city of Nashua wanted to remove me as moderator unconstitutionally. He made sure that didn't happen. So going back to the NRCC at the December meeting, I came into the room. I had no intention of running for chair because the significant other in my life wanted me to do less, not more. I'm like, all right, I'll do less, not more. So when I walked in, Bill just walked over to me and told me the situation. Said, hey, we don't have anyone running for this. We don't want this to go back into receivership. We would really wish you would consider doing this. I know it's a big thing to ask. I really respect Bill O'Brien, and he really went to bat for me. So when they announced that there was no one running, all I can say is the Holy Spirit filled me with inspiration, and I stood up and said, I'll do it. And that's how it happened. But Avalon was next to me. Avalon Lewis, his name's John, but his nickname's Avalon.
Yep.
I said, Avalon, I might do this. You got to second me? And he said yes.
Okay.
So when I stood up and said, I'll do it. I got nominated. He seconded my nomination. And then thankfully, luckily for me, Avalon agreed to become the vice chairman.
Yeah. I think you were a great combo. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to have Avalon on the next show.
Avalon is a great guy.
Oh, yeah.
He's the personality of the organization. He has a giant smile. He's a warm and gracious guy. Makes everyone feel at ease. I think I'm more of the get it done type guy.
Yep.
I like the energy, like get stuff done, and I'm probably a little more blunt. I don't mean to be.
No, it's good to have complementary skill sets.
Yeah.
It comes in handy. All right, so we got about 2 minutes to talk about this. What are your plans in terms for the committee? What are you hoping to do to revitalize and make this, a winning committee for the city of Nashua?
We want to get the word out that the Republican Party is the party of inclusion for everyone. The Republican Party is the party that ended slavery. We're the party that passed the 13th and 14th Amendments, freeing the slaves forever and giving them citizenship. We want everyone, and everyone's included under our big tent. We don't identify people based on your skin color, your identity, your sexual orientation. If you love America and you believe in our Constitution, we want you to join us to make this the country where freedom reigns. The politicians should be following the will of the people, not the will of the corporations or the will of big money someplace locking us down in our houses. So we intend to grow the party in Nashua and make it more, so there's more people from every walk of life in it. We're not blue collar, we're not white collar, we're not left, we're not right, we're Americans. Americans believe in the same value, mothers and fathers, families, there are only two genders. So we want to get the word out that if you believe what we believe in and you love this city and this state and this country, come join us so we can make a difference. So we can get people in the State House and at local levels to control the government to make this place Nashua livable. With the tax increases that have been put in place, it's becoming unlivable.
All right, so we got about less than a minute left. So where would you send people if they wanted to see, what you have a website address?
Yes.
You want to talk about the meetings, what days they're on?
So we have a website. It's www.nashuagop.org. We also have social media. We have a Facebook page and Instagram, but just look up Nashua GOP or the Nashua Republican City Committee. And all our information is there, how you can join, how you can get information, how you can contact me, how you can contact Avalon or Paul Shibblehute or Virginia Kozlowskis, and it's also Gil Davis. That's our executive board. And we're going to have upcoming events we're going to invite people to as well and fundraisers. But basically our website's our main source of how to get the word out.
Wonderful. Listen, boy, that time really went quickly.
It's really, I can't believe it's gone already.
I really appreciate you coming in and speaking with us. I wish you all the work, success in the world. I'll help you as best I can.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Good luck at the State House, too.
Thank you. Bye.